Nobody knew how long he'd been lying there. The wind cut across the Thompson ranch like a sharpened knife, tossing dry grass against the fading Arizona sun. Dusk swallowed the horizon, turning the hills jagged and black. Evan Thompson wiped calloused hands on his worn denim, pausing mid-step. He'd just finished evening chores. Horses fed, fence mended, a routine that filled his solitary days. At 32, he'd built this life far from judgment, far from the family that had discarded him when he had finally spoken his truth. Being gay in rural America had cost him everything except this land and his fierce independence. The ranch had become both sanctuary and prison, 200 acres of rugged beauty where Evan could be himself, yet never truly be seen. Former Army Ranger turned cattle rancher, he'd learned to live with the silence. His military training had taught him vigilance. His discharge under "Don't Ask, Don't Tell" had taught him caution. Each sunrise brought the same empty promise. Each sunset the same hollow comfort. Nothing seemed out of place this evening. And then he heard it. A faint cry, panicked, almost swallowed by the desert wind. "I can't breathe." It was a man's voice. Evan froze. His heart thumped like a trapped animal. Not a soul lived within miles of his property. And yet there it was, a desperate whisper cutting through the emptiness. He moved toward the old storage shed, cautious and deliberate, military instincts awakening. Every footfall cracked against the parched earth, announcing his approach. His hand hovered near the hunting knife at his belt, a habit from years of solitude and learned wariness. The shed door sagged on rusted hinges. Inside, shadows lurked in corners. Dust motes floated through the last ribbons of sunlight, making the air shimmer with ghostly particles. And then he saw him, under a heavy canvas tarp, curled like a wounded animal, shivering. Evan's stomach twisted. He knelt, brushing at the edges. The fabric was thick, stifling. Something about the way the stranger trembled made Evan's chest tighten with recognition, the trembling of someone who had endured too much. "Hey there, Kisei," he said softly, voice rough from disuse. "It's all right now. I'm here." Evan's lonely existence suddenly had purpose in this moment of unexpected connection. If you've ever felt invisible until someone truly saw you, this story might touch something deep within. Stay with Heart Stories for what happens next, because sometimes rescue comes from the most unexpected places, and sometimes saving another person means finding yourself again. Evan tugged at the tarp, revealing a young man with dark hair plastered to his forehead. Blood caked along his temple, his breathing shallow and labored. The stranger's eyes, wide, dark, desperate, locked onto Evan's with primal fear. "Please," he rasped, fingers clutching weakly at Evan's wrist. A flicker of movement at the doorway caught Evan's attention, a shadow shifting in the growing darkness. Something or someone was watching. Every instinct honed from years of military service and solitude screamed danger. He didn't hesitate. Evan gathered the injured man in his arms, noting how lightweight he felt despite his adult frame. The stranger couldn't be older than 25. His lean body racked with tremors that spoke of exhaustion beyond physical limits. The wind whipped against them as Evan ran toward his cabin, kicking the heavy oak door shut behind them and sliding the bolt home with a resolute thunk. Inside smelled of wood smoke and coffee, familiar and safe, the scent of a life carefully constructed to need no one else. "Alex Mitchell," the man whispered as Evan cleaned his wounds with antiseptic from his first aid kit. "My name is Alex." His voice cracked like parched earth. Evan worked methodically, applying butterfly bandages to the gash above Alex's eye, wrapping his bruised ribs with practiced movements. He'd learned emergency medicine during his time with the Rangers, skills meant for battlefields now serving in this intimate moment of human connection. His hands remained steady despite the questions thundering through his mind. "Evan Thompson," he replied simply, offering water which Alex drank greedily. "What happened to you?" He watched Alex's throat work as he swallowed, noticed the fine tremor in his hands, the way his eyes darted toward the windows, signs Evan recognized from men who'd seen combat, who carried the weight of witnessing what couldn't be unseen. They'll kill me if they find me. Alex's fingers trembled around the glass. I saw them. Important men, a senator from this state and the CEO of Liberty Corp. They murdered a whistleblower. He swallowed hard, voice dropping. I have proof on this. He patted his pocket weakly, revealing the edge of a flash drive. I'm a journalist. Been investigating their defense contracts, illegal weapons development. Yesterday, I finally got evidence. Recordings of them planning the whole thing. As Evan peered through the curtains at the darkening landscape, he noticed unusual tracks in the dirt, too deliberate for wildlife, too methodical for casual trespassers. A scrap of black fabric caught on his fence post fluttered in the wind, bearing an embroidered insignia he didn't recognize. A stylized eagle with claws extended. His military training kicked in, recognizing the methodical approach of trained hunters. These weren't local police or random pursuers. This was something more organized, more dangerous. Alex had stumbled onto something deadly, and now Evan was involved too. Sometimes protection means facing what frightens us most. For Evan, who had hidden himself away from the world, sheltering this stranger meant stepping back into the fight he thought he'd left behind. The choice to help another can be the most profound act of courage, especially when it means confronting your own hidden truths in the shadows you've been running from all along. Night pressed against the cabin windows like an unwelcome visitor. Evan moved with quiet efficiency, boarding up windows, checking the locks, preparing for what felt inevitable. His old service pistol, kept oiled but unused for years, now rested on the kitchen counter beside his hunting knife. Outside, the wind carried whispers and the distant sound of vehicles on the access road, still miles away but approaching steadily, purposefully. Liberty Corp isn't just a defense contractor, Alex explained, voice steadier after food and rest. He sat at Evan's kitchen table, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. They're developing illegal bioweapons, bribing officials from Arizona to Washington. The man I saw them kill was going to testify before a closed congressional committee. He ran fingers through his hair, wincing at hidden bruises. I've been investigating them for months as a freelance journalist. Yesterday, I finally got proof, and they've been hunting me since. His eyes met Evan's. I didn't choose your ranch by accident. Your name was on a list. What list? Evan's voice hardened, the warmth he'd shown earlier crystallizing into something vigilant and wary. Former military who left under suspicious circumstances. People who might have reason to help expose government corruption. Alex hesitated, something unspoken passing between them. Your discharge under "Don't Ask, Don't Tell" was flagged. They track people they consider potential threats or allies. The revelation hit Evan like physical pain. Even here, in his self-imposed exile, his identity had marked him. The very thing that had cost him family, career, community, still defined him to strangers. He turned away, jaw tight with old anger that had never fully healed, merely scarred over with time and distance. You're gay too, aren't you? Evan asked finally, recognizing something familiar in Alex's careful demeanor, the way he held himself slightly apart even while seeking connection. Alex nodded slowly. Closeted in my field, especially in investigating military contracts. He didn't need to finish. Both men understood living divided lives, the exhaustion of constant vigilance, of measuring every word and gesture. Suddenly, the night split open with the crack of a vehicle door. Headlights swept across the property, deliberately killed before reaching the cabin. Evan extinguished the lamps, plunging them into darkness. They waited in tense silence until the first impact hit the door. A battering ram wielded with professional precision. The wood groaned but held against the initial assault. Back door, Evan whispered, grabbing his weapons and essential supplies. But as they moved toward the kitchen, the window exploded inward in a shower of glass. A man in tactical gear lunged through the opening, face obscured by a mask. Movements fluid and trained. Evan reacted without thought, muscle memory from his military days taking over. He struck with calculated force, years of repressed rage and fear channeling into each precise movement. The intruder was skilled, but hadn't expected trained resistance. When the brief, violent struggle ended, the man lay unconscious, and Evan was examining the insignia on his vest, a stylized eagle with liberty emblazoned beneath, identical to the fabric he'd found earlier. The sound of additional vehicles approaching echoed through the valley. They were out of time. What started as simple compassion had become a fight for survival. But facing this danger had awakened something in Evan that years of isolation had buried. The warrior who refused to surrender. The man who would stand against injustice, even when the kid might be everything. Dawn painted the eastern sky in watercolor hues of pink and gold when Evan and Alex emerged from the root cellar where they'd hidden after the attack. The cabin stood partially destroyed, door hanging from broken hinges, windows shattered like jagged teeth. Evidence of the Liberty Corps team's frustrated search lay everywhere. Overturned furniture, slashed cushions, ransacked cupboards. They'd eventually left, but Evan knew with cold certainty they'd return with reinforcements. "We have about an hour, Monsieur," Evan said, gathering supplies into saddlebags with practiced efficiency. His voice carried the calm of a man accustomed to crisis, though his eyes betrayed the gravity of their situation. His horse Dakota, a sturdy Palomino gelding with intelligent eyes and powerful shoulders, stood patiently as Evan worked. "They'll have roadblocks on the highways. Our only chance is across the Diablo Canyon." Alex looked dubiously at the rugged terrain visible in the distance, sun glinting off red rock formations that seemed to rise from the earth like the spine of some ancient beast. "I'm not much of a rider." "Then it's lucky you'll be riding double with someone who is." Evan's mouth quirked in what might have been his first genuine smile in months, a brief lightening in the storm of their circumstances. They rode hard as the sun climbed higher, Dakota carrying them across terrain few vehicles could navigate. The Arizona landscape spread before them, beautiful and merciless. Saguaro cacti stood like ancient sentinels against the cloudless sky, their arms raised in silent witness. Yucca and mesquite dotted the rocky soil, survivors in a land that forgave no weakness. Evan guided them through hidden trails, dry creek beds, and narrow passes, relying on knowledge gained from countless solitary rides across his chosen refuge. "How'd you end up out here alone?" Alex asked during a brief rest, his body pressed against Evan's back as they shared the saddle, an intimacy born of necessity, yet not unwelcome. Evan was silent so long Alex thought he wouldn't answer. "After my discharge, my family made it clear I wasn't welcome. My father said he had no son." The words emerged toneless, a wound so old it had scarred over, yet never truly healed. "I bought this land with my service pay, figured if I couldn't belong anywhere, I'd create a place where at least I belonged to myself." Alex's hand tightened briefly on Evan's shoulder. "I understand. I've spent my life hiding, watching my words, pretending, being a ghost in my own life." The confession hung between them, creating an unexpected intimacy. "Sometimes I think that's why I became a journalist, to tell other people's truths when I couldn't tell my own." The moment shattered as the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors echoed across the canyon, mechanical and relentless. They urged Dakota forward, pushing toward the narrow pass that would shield them from aerial view. The horse navigated treacherous switchbacks as small rocks tumbled beneath his hooves, dust rising behind them like desperate prayers. At the canyon's edge, they spotted 3 black SUVs on the distant road, Liberty Corps closing in with mechanical precision. Evan pointed toward a narrow trail descending into shadow. "There's a place down there where the canyon walls will block their communications and thermal imaging. If we make it through, Sheriff Miller's jurisdiction starts 5 miles beyond. He's an old friend, one of the few who stood by me." As they urged Dakota forward into the unknown, the connection between them strengthened. 2 men who had lived in shadows now racing toward light. Sometimes the path to freedom winds through the darkest valleys, and trust becomes possible only when everything else is stripped away. In their shared danger, both men glimpsed a possibility neither had dared imagine, that they might emerge from this not just alive, but truly seen. The town of Riverside appeared first as distant lights twinkling in the valley, a constellation of human presence after hours of wilderness and pursuit. Evan and Alex paused atop the final ridge, Dakota's sides heaving from the hard journey. The sheriff's department vehicles formed a protective line across the main access road. Sheriff Miller had received Evan's emergency message sent from a hidden satellite phone during their brief rest at the canyon. Blue and red lights pulsed against the darkening sky as officers positioned themselves strategically, ready for confrontation. "Rob Miller is the only person who visited after I moved out here," Evan explained, his voice rough with exhaustion, yet carrying a note of something like hope. "When everyone else turned their backs, he showed up with beer and never once mentioned it my discharge. Just treated me like a person, not a category." Alex studied Evan's profile against the sunset. Strong jaw, lines etched by years of solitude, eyes that had seen both battlefield horrors and the quiet violence of rejection. There's more good people than we sometimes believe. They're just quieter than the cruel ones. As they watched from their elevated position, 3 black SUVs appeared on the horizon, approaching the police barricade with predatory confidence. The vehicle slowed, then stopped. Men in tactical gear emerged, facing the local officers across a divide that represented more than just physical distance. It was justice against power, truth against deception, the law of small communities against shadowy agencies that operated beyond accountability. "Even if we make it through this," Alex said softly, "they'll keep coming. Liberty Corp has government contracts worth billions. They own senators, judges, generals." Evan turned to him, eyes reflecting determination forged through years of solitude and survival. "Then we make the evidence too public to bury. We make silence more dangerous than speaking out." His hand found Alex's, calloused fingers intertwining with ink-stained ones. "My ranch can be more than just my hiding place. It can be a sanctuary for others, a place to stand and fight from." Below them, Sheriff Miller's voice carried through a megaphone, reading rights and statutes that even powerful men couldn't simply ignore. "Not here, not today, not with witnesses and local media already arriving." Drawn by the sheriff's cryptic but public alert about armed trespassers in pursuit of civilians, the sunrise painted the valley in promise as they descended towards safety. The warmth between their clasped hands spoke of possibilities neither man had dared imagine in their solitary journeys. Sometimes rescue comes not in being saved, but in finding someone worth saving. Sometimes home isn't a place, but the courage to stop running. Have you ever found strength in helping someone when you thought you had nothing left to give? How has standing up for another person helped you rediscover your own voice? Share your story in the comments below and subscribe to Heart Stories for more tales of courage, connection, and the moments that remind us we're never truly alone, even in our darkest hours.